Hi, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Gary Xavier, one of our very great authors of Math for HVACR, and also a developer and script writer for our Follow the Heat animations. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Cathy.
Great to have you here. I wish we were in person at the HVAC Excellence Conference like we have so many times in the past, but great to be able to speak to our audience virtually. So thank you for taking the time today. I'm sure a lot of our audience recognizes you from the sessions you've done in the past at HVAC Excellence. Today we wanted to talk to them, let them learn a little bit more about your Math for HVAC book. But before that, could you just give us a little introduction about Gary Xavier?
Why, sure. I'm never hesitant to talk about myself, Cathy, as you probably know. And everyone, I'm glad you're able to meet us here. We kind of missed the being in Las Vegas and Atlanta again this year coming up. So unfortunately, this is the way we do it now. And so we'll make it work. And welcome to everyone. I am Gary Xavier, as Cathy said. Some of you perhaps have seen me before with my proverbial flag tie and glass of orange juice. But what I've done in the past is worked on the same stuff that you're teaching your students about. Started back in the 1960s, believe it or not, when I was in high school, and started playing around with refrigeration systems. And one thing led to another, and that's where I started working on these things. And I kind of life gets in the way of life sometimes, but my plans changed over the years, and one thing led to another, and I started a business where I specialized in the water side of large commercial industrial boilers and chillers, etc. I did that up until about 25 years ago when, very fortunately, as I decided I was getting tired of doing the physical work, I got an offer from a trade school to teach. And I'd always wanted to teach. I'd always thought that that was something I wanted to do. And so I've been doing that ever since. And my association with Goodheart-Willcox came along at just the right time. I was on the road teaching classes all over the country. And they had a project they wanted me to work on. And I did that. And then they asked me about a math book. And well, that's what we did. So I've had a good run in the HVAC field. You can see I've still got my toys around me here. I don't travel on the road much anymore, but I have all of my equipment here so that when I do my classes, I can at least demonstrate some things to my students. And I know that's what you folks do in your classes as well, as you get their hands on it, which is what we all like to do. So that's what I've been doing. And along with the Math for HVACR book that I did with Goodheart-Willcox, we always also did the Follow the Heat animations. Follow the Heat, if you've joined me at the conferences in the past, you know Follow the Heat is something that I fondly think of because it's the way I started teaching it 20 some odd years ago. When I first started my first class, I got to tell you, I was terrified. I was terrified of those students, but I couldn't get the refrigeration cycle across to them. And so just one day in class, I don't know why, I just said, guys, just follow the heat here. The heat starts at the evaporator. We squeeze the refrigerant at the compressor, send it over to the condenser and give up the heat. And the next day that seemed to just roll into my discussion again, follow the heat, follow the heat. And one thing led to another, and that's what we teach now. And so Goodheart-Willcox asked if we could do some sort of a series of those, and they came out as animations, and I'm very happy to have done those, and am amazed at the quality of the animations. Not what I did. I just did the talking, but the animators did a marvelous job on that. So that's kind of what I've done and what I do. And the math book came along because, again, Goodheart-Willcox asked if I thought I could do a math book for HVACR. And it's kind of a funny conversation how it went, but Dave Boyo, that was the editor, one of the editors there, called me one day and said, Gary, have you ever thought about writing a math book for HVACR? And I said, Dave, I taught math once. And he said, wow, you were a math teacher. And I said, yeah. Well, after the book was published, I think I finally let Dave in on the secret that the math I had taught was when I was in sixth grade. I taught a bunch of fifth graders a little bit about math, and it lasted about 20 minutes. It was my first practice teaching session. I was 10 years old, and but I've loved math ever since. And I taught it at my HVAC program. When I taught at the trade school, I taught math at the start of my HVAC program. And you folks will probably understand why. I'm not sure the principal of the school understood why, because one day I got a call from the school principal, and she said, "Gary, could you come down to the office when you get a break?" And I said, "Sure." So I went down to the office and wandered in and said, "Mrs. Pullen, what's up?" And she said, "I've had 3 complaints on your class in the last week." And I got a little nervous because that was my first full-time teaching job. And I said, "Okay, what are the complaints?" And she said, "Well, 3 of your students have visited my office and complained that they signed up for an HVAC program and you're teaching math." And I kind of smiled a little bit and I said, "Okay, let me explain." And she said, please do so." And I said, "When you sign up these students for my program, if I recall, you give them a pre-test on English and grammar and mathematics." And she said, "Yes, we do." And I said, "How are their math scores?" And she said, "Horrendously bad." And I said, "I rest my case." And she said, "Carry on. And if I get any more complaints, I just ignore them." Guys, I've taught math for a long time since then, because what I found out is when I started trying to explain things like the pressure temperature relationship, superheat, subcooling, the coefficient of performance, and having help with psychrometrics, these guys didn't know math. They couldn't do it. So I then started each semester with a math program. And so the first week of HVAC class was math. And what I found was I didn't have a book. None of the books that we were using really addressed the math situation. So I had to improvise. I did a lot of work on the board. I did a lot of handwritten handout sheets that I would copy and pass out. So I actually was writing a book for my classes as I went. So when Goodheart-Willcox folks asked me to do a math book, it was kind of a no-brainer. I knew we needed it. I knew we could use it. And very honestly, I enjoyed doing it. And I've got it right here. I keep one handy, obviously, but I've got it right here. And it was one of those projects. It took me a while. It took over a year to do this. But what I found is that by explaining math from the very beginning, I started out in this book with just basic arithmetic, how to count place values and estimation and fractions and all these things. And then by the time we get to the end, we're into trigonometry so that we can work with angles of ductwork and this kind of thing. And what I found out is I actually learned as I was writing the book. I learned things that I had forgotten and that I had probably hadn't taught in my own classes because I didn't have a book to follow. So it worked out pretty well for me, and I've enjoyed doing it. And the guys that I've talked to that have had the book and used the book, the comments I've gotten have been very gratifying. So that's what I've done. That's what I've done.
So Gary, could you let some of our instructors know today how they might incorporate your Math for HVAC book into their HVAC curriculum?
Sure. Cathy, when I said that when I was doing my classes at the trade school that I started out by teaching math, that's exactly what I did. And I realized that that's not always possible. And I found that in the training that I do now, after I left the trade school and went on the road doing seminar training, which I've done now for the past 16 or 17 years, what I found is that I don't have time to do a math program before I do an HVAC program. So I just kind of sprinkle it in, so to speak. For example, when we get to superheat calculations, I make sure that they are not only familiar with the pressure temperature relationship, but basic arithmetic. Subtract this, add this, etc. when we get into things like the coefficient of performance or the subcooling or total superheat, any of these things that require a little bit of mathematics, then I generally just pause for a moment and run through a little bit of math. As it gets more advanced, I do a class on air handling, for example. So we get into psychrometrics a lot, of course, and duct sizing and friction loss, et cetera. And at each of those points, as we bring up another formula, and I sometimes I want to make sure I don't inundate my students with formulas, and I always tell them, you don't have to memorize this formula. You can look it up. That's what books are for. But I know that over time, as they use it, it'll stick in their head regardless. So what I do is then I walk them through the order of operations, of course, parentheses first, then exponents, et cetera, so that they realize that they've got to do this, and I always call it a little bit of algebra. I don't want to terrify them, so I just say it's a little bit of algebra here. But I use those throughout the program as I need them, rather than just one whole program of a week or two of mathematics. It can be done either way, but I found that it's useful to just have a text that I can go to and say, okay, on this page, you'll see a drawing here of ductwork. Let's do some calculations on that. Or here's a piping layout. Let's do some takeoffs on that. And if you have problems with formulas for the diameter of a pipe or for the capacity of 100 feet of 6-inch pipe, then we work with that on a case-by-case basis. And that seems to work. That seems to work. I will say this, folks, and that is follow the heat, as I mentioned before, is kind of it's actually a trademark of mine and Goodheart-Willcox. But follow the heat is something I'm pretty well known for. But there's another phrase that I'm not very well known for that I used when I first started promoting math. And I got a lot of groans out of my classes when I did it. But one of the first nights that we started working on this math program, I was hearing so much complaining from the students that I walked up to the board and I, in very big letters across the top of the board, wrote, "Math is fun!" exclamation point. And so every day after that, as soon as I would get into any issue with a math calculation for psychrometrics or for duct calculations or piping takeoffs or whatever, the first thing I would do was walk up to the board and write, "Math is fun!" exclamation point, just to remind them that they didn't have to be terrified of this. And sometimes I think little things like that just kind of lighten the mood a little bit and kind of relax everybody. So I think, again, we all have to know it. We all have to know it. And we are so dependent on electronics now. One of the things that I always did, and you'll see it in the textbook as well, is it says in certain portions, it says no calculator allowed, no calculator allowed. I took the calculators away from my students and made them do it by hand, because the calculator doesn't teach you anything. If it gives you a wrong answer, if you don't have an idea of what that answer should be, then you don't know that it's wrong. So that was a big key in the way I did it as well, was make them do it in their head, make them do it without the use of electronics. And I want to carry that a little bit further. I want to talk for just a moment about things like this, if I may. And that is this. I love my toys. Most of us do. Most of us that have done this kind of thing really like our toys. And you can see I'm surrounded by a few $1,000s worth of toys here. But this is great. A digital manifold with thermometers on it and a micron gauge and all these things. It'll tell me everything I want to know, but it doesn't teach me anything. So even though I like this, and if I were still out in the field doing service work, I would have this in my hand all the time. I like it, but I don't teach from it. I teach from an old analog manifold, and that way they have to learn how to read the thermometer, how to read the gauges, how to do the calculations. I show them a digital set, and at that point, then they understand what the numbers mean. The reason I do it that way is because of what I've seen in the field. I worked in a lot of large mechanical rooms, process chillers, high pressure steam boilers, etc. And what I found out as I worked in training operators for those facilities is oftentimes all they knew was what it said on the screen. They didn't know what the numbers meant. So they would just watch the screen, and if they got an alarm, they would answer it. But they had no idea of what the numbers were really telling them. And that to me is wrong. And I think our students need to know the background to it. So they've got to learn the math. And that's the way I've always taught it.
All right, Gary, thank you for telling us about math for HVAC and how it applies to students and the benefits that students and instructors would have by using that HVAC-applied math. So thank you for that, and thank you for your efforts in creating the text for Goodheart-Willcox. You also were very involved in helping us with our new Follow the Heat animations. You talked about the Follow the Heat trademark between Goodheart-Willcox and yourself, and a lot of your sessions at HVAC have been titled Follow the Heat. You're the Follow the Heat guy. So as far as the animations, can you just give us some background as to the development of those, and again, how instructors and students would benefit from the animations?
Oh, sure, Cathy. Thank you. As probably anyone that knows me knows, I love to talk about Follow the Heat. And as I said earlier, it actually started by accident. I just was struggling with how to explain the refrigeration cycle. And what I found as I started my teaching career was that the textbooks that I saw always started explaining the cycle at the compressor. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to follow the textbook, and it didn't seem to, the students just didn't seem to get it. And just by accident, one day in class, I said, guys, just follow the heat. It starts at the evaporator. The return air or the return water goes across the evaporator, gives up some heat to the refrigerant. Follow the heat. And so from that point on, it seemed like it was working a little better. And I started drawing my diagram on the board and doing that. But I just kept repeating that, follow the heat, follow the heat, follow it. And that group seemed to really get into that. They could understand it then. And so that became the way I did it. And I came up with that little drawing where I started at the evaporator. Instead of starting at the compressor like pretty much everybody else was doing, I guess, I started at the evaporator where the heat starts. And it just seemed to make sense. So I trademarked that and said, all right, well, this is the way I'm going to teach it. And over the years, several other instructors that I knew had asked if they could use it. And I said, sure, just, hey, if it works, use it in your classes. And so when I started presenting it at the conferences, I guess I've done maybe 4 or 5 of those, or 3 or 4, I don't know. But when I started doing that program at the conference, other instructors seemed to be very, very interested in following that concept, follow the heat. And of course, I was there at the request of Goodheart-Willcox with the math book, etc. And so they very graciously looked at what I was doing and said, you know, maybe there's something we can do with this follow the heat. And I said, hey, whatever we can do. And they brought up the idea of animations. And I've got to tell you, Cathy, I was at first, I said, what, a cartoon? What are you talking about here? I'm not a young guy. I don't think about animations as a way to teach people. But they showed me some animations that they'd done for other programs. And when I saw them, I said, this could work. This could work. So I got busy and I wrote a series of animations. I think we have 60 some odd of those. But I wrote them and sent my ideas over to the animators along with a script. And the animators started to put some things together. And then we sent the scripts out to some of you folks for review to see if you had some suggestions. And thank you guys that worked on that with me, because I got some very good suggestions from other instructors, things that I wasn't quite explaining the way they did. And when I looked at their ideas, it was like, whoa, this really makes sense. It's better than what I was saying. And so we combined all that. And I was amazed, very honestly, at the animation quality. I was very, very pleased with that. And in that process, the animators came up with what we called Mr. Heat, the Follow the Heat character. And that then was trademarked by Goodheart-Willcox and myself. And that's how that thing started. And I've been very, very pleased with what I've heard from the students that have looked at the follow the heat animations and from the instructors that have used it. I've gotten some really good feedback on that. So it's one of those things that I was very skeptical. I'm an old guy. I didn't think we could learn from cartoons, so to speak, but I love them. I love the animations. I'm very pleased with those. And I think they're a good training tool. What I've heard in some of my classes, and I'm sure you fellows, folks do the same thing, I use multiple types of media when I do my presentations. I use PowerPoint slideshow. I use some video clips. I use some animations. I use some live demonstration. And this is what keeps the students interested. And so I think the animations and the videos, the HVAC videos that go with the modern refrigeration air conditioning textbook, I wrote those videos as well. That was the first project I did for Goodheart-Willcox. I think all of those things do help. I use them in my own classes, and I think they do help. So again, the animation project was it was a new one for me, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. So follow the heat.
That's fantastic. And we had no idea that a lot of learning would be going online back when we were creating those digital animations and videos, but how great now for instructors and students alike to be able to have those to use in hybrid courses. So thank you for your work on those, Gary. Fantastic job putting those together. And just like a lot of our audience recognize your face from doing sessions, I think they'll also recognize your voice as they listen to some samples of those animations.
Thanks, Cathy. It's always a pleasure working with you folks at Goodheart-Willcox. I've been fortunate to work with some really nice people over the years of my career, and Goodheart-Willcox is right up there at the top of my list. And I can't say enough good about it. If you have room in the interview for one more quick story, I will tell you this: that the first call I got from Goodheart-Willcox again was from Dave Boyo, who was an editor and now retired. But he called me one day right out of the blue, and he said, "I'm looking for someone." He introduced himself, and he said, "I'm looking for someone to write video scripts. Are you familiar with our company?" And I said, "No, I don't think I am." And he said, "Well, we publish the modern refrigeration air conditioning text and a few other things, etc." And as I was sitting at my desk talking to or listening to Mr. Boyle, I looked up at my bookshelf and I had about 5 Goodheart-Willcox books on my bookshelf. And I just didn't remember the name of the publisher, which is not a good thing perhaps for the publisher. But I immediately pulled one of the books down and was looking through it as he was talking to me. And we've been working together ever since. And I was using their textbooks, but I didn't remember their name. So just a good company, guys. And we always like to work with nice people. And the Goodheart-Willcox people, to me, have been very, very nice to work with.
Well, that's nice to hear, Gary. And truly, our authors and their textbooks are the superstars in our whole story. So we'd rather have people recognize the names of our books and our great authors. You also mentioned working with some reviewers, and I want to give a little shout out to all of the instructors who help in the process of creating these textbooks, including your own. So it takes a village, and we're real happy to have all these great HVAC educators as part of our program. So thank you for spending some time with us today, and I'm sure this audience will be able to enjoy some other sessions from you